Hi, folks, and welcome to White Collar Week. It's the isolation that destroys us. The solution is in community. Today's podcast is about mental health and the crushing stress and depression that professionals sometimes experience that can induce suicidal ideations, suicide attempts, suicide itself, the pain and anguish caused to family and others, and how one can find relief and hope instead of pain, suffering, and tragedy. My guests today are Reverend Bob Flanagan, who has written, spoken, and preached about his own mental health issues, and Meredith Atwood, a former lawyer and now author and life coach who is candid about her suicide attempt, sobriety after drug and alcohol addiction, and finding her way back through triathlons and weightlifting, and Elizabeth Kelley, a lawyer who specializes in representing defendants with mental disabilities all over the country, and in attorney wellness so that they don't burn out and cause harm to themselves, their families, and their clients. A warning, this is a very difficult conversation in which we all talk about our personal relationships with depression and suicide, a much-needed discussion in these times of community and personal trauma. So, coming up, a brave talk about suicide on White Collar Week. I hope you will join us. Hello, and welcome to White Collar Week, a podcast sponsored by Progressive Prison Ministries, the world's first ministry serving the white-collar justice community. I'm Jeff Grant, co-founder and your host. I served almost 14 months in a federal prison for a white-collar crime I committed when I was a lawyer, so I know that it's the isolation that kills us, and the solution is in community. So let's get started. Hi, folks, and welcome to White Collar Week. We have a very special show for you, and a difficult one in some ways, because everybody on our program today has either suffered some mental health issues, myself included, or is involved in helping people with mental health issues, and specifically some suicide issues or suicidal ideations. So I'm hoping that we can still laugh about some of it in some of our stories, and find some of the commonality and the humor in it. But it's very serious business, and that's why I asked these special people to be with us. So we have my good friend Meredith Atwood with us today, and I've been on her podcast a couple of times, same 24 hours. And Bob Flanagan, he's a fellow Connecticut person, and he's a Episcopal priest, and we know each other through the yoga world, actually. And Elizabeth Kelley, who's an attorney based in Spokane, and she's edited books and is an expert in the mental health issues in the law, and helps people all around the country who have those issues in their cases. So Meredith, Bob, Elizabeth, welcome to White Collar Week. It's good to see you all.
Hi, thanks, Jeff.
Hey.
Good morning.
Hey.
So, why don't we start with just going around, each person giving maybe 5 minutes on your background, and then what we can do is get into conversation, start talking about this, and tell some stories. So, Bob, why don't we start with you, since my conversation with you is what kind of lifted off the idea of having this podcast today.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Jeff. I became a priest after a career in financial services in Greenwich, and I've been a priest now for almost 20 years. And one of the things that I find most interesting is we are, as priests, there's even today in a world that is kind of lowered expectations around all sorts of people, but lowered expectations about religion. Even today, where priests are any of the clergy are expected to have their shit together. To be honest, I mean that we're supposed to have our mental health all squared off, and that's kind of like the little dark secret, is that clergy have mental health problems too. And so my goal here, and one of the reasons why I wrote my book and why I advocate so much for things like suicide prevention, is because of my own journey, but also, to pull back that curtain, like the Wizard of Oz and Dorothy and the Toto pulling back the curtain, to see what's really happening.
Thanks, Bob. And Bob has written a book. We'll give you plenty of time to talk about it. You all have books, actually. That's fantastic. And I push your books. I actually have Bob's and Meredith's in my little stack over here.
Yeah.
But we'll give you an opportunity to be able to talk about it. So Meredith, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll get to Elizabeth.
Yes. Hi, I'm Meredith Atwood. I'm, as Jeff mentioned, the host of the Same 24 Hours podcast. My background, I'm a recovering attorney, and that comes out of being a recovering people pleaser because I became an attorney to make everyone proud and happy. And it just was not my heart's desire. And I realized a lot of what I was doing was not my heart's desire. And so over the course of the last decade, I've really learned to kind of claim my own space in the world and to make myself happy instead of trying to make everyone else happy. But with regard to suicide, I actually had a suicide attempt when I was 20 years old. And this was before law school, and I was a heavy drinker. I'm 5 years sober now. And it was just 20 years of battling the idea that I didn't want that life, and distinguishing that from the fact that it's not about not wanting to live, but about not wanting to live as I was. And that's the conclusion I've come to over these years, that a lot of us are in a lot of pain and we're suffering, and it's trying to figure out how to find a way out of that. And so that's sort of what I've done with my mission, is trying to share my story in hopes that I can encourage other people to keep going.
Thanks, Meredith. Elizabeth, would you like to introduce yourself?
I would, but before I start, Jeff, what do I have to do in order for my 2 books to be on the bookshelf behind you?
All you have to do is send me a book, Elizabeth, and you're right there. This is my little pile of guests I've had. So it's kind of a subliminal advertising for people.
Good to know. Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me. As Jeff said earlier, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I'm based in Spokane, Washington, and I have a nationwide practice specializing in representing people with mental disabilities. I'm very deliberate about my word choice. Mental disabilities means not only people with mental illnesses like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, major depression, but it also means intellectual and developmental disabilities like fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and autism spectrum disorders. The question that everyone asks criminal defense lawyers is, how can you defend those people? And what I say in terms of my clients is that you need to remember that the culpability, the involvement of people with mental disabilities is very, very different from that of other people charged with crimes. Because people with mental disabilities may not understand the nature of what they did. They may be powerless to control themselves, or they may be conned by their so-called friends into criminal involvement. So that's why I do what I do. And over the years, I've become involved with issues of wellness, and that has spread into the area of attorney wellness. And as Meredith mentioned earlier, the legal profession is very, very stressful. Among other things, we literally have clients' lives, livelihoods, and liberty in our hands. And we take that very seriously. And the burnout can be high. And unfortunately, some attorneys take advantage of coping mechanisms, or what they think are coping mechanisms, that turn out to be profoundly destructive. And suicide, sadly to say, touches people who are accused with crimes, but it also touches people in the legal profession. And I'm glad that Jeff has taken the opportunity to shine the spotlight on this very, very serious issue.
Thank you all. I don't know if it's kismet or what that's brought us all together, but I agree with Bob about the dirty little secret part. And I'm 18 years sober now, and it was really easy to talk about my drug and alcohol addiction early in my sobriety. And that was the milieu I was in. But getting down to the bottom of it and kind of what caused it, and I saw myself being able to talk about my drug and alcohol addiction. Then I was able to talk about my legal problems and my incarceration story, and last became the mental illness part of it, and how I was self-medicating or what I was doing to myself in order to check out, as it were. And that included a suicide attempt a little over 18 years ago. But all of a sudden, I'm talking about this with everybody. I was talking about it with Bob. I was talking about it as Elizabeth. Elizabeth asked me to submit a chapter for a book that she's editing for the American Bar Association. And I was writing it, or I was actually rewriting it, because it's a chapter from a book that I was writing. And I found myself getting upset. I found myself getting more involved in that story again than I would have chosen to otherwise. So I'm hoping what we can do is all talk about kind of the edge, where the tipping point was, either for each of us or people that we know or people we've helped, and what led us to make hopefully some better choices other than going over the edge. So Bob, why don't we start with you, because your book is very, very it's very giving. You put your stuff right out there, and I admire that. So maybe you just want to kind of talk about your mental health issues.
Yeah, sure. Well, just to give you one little story again about this kind of expectations clergy have. I was while I've been a priest, I've also been a coach, a rowing coach, for about 10 years, to call it. And at one point, I was with some rowers that knew me really well. We were away at a regatta and a race, and I needed something quick, and my bag was in the cab of the truck, and I went to open it, and it was locked. And as it just came out, right? I said, "Fuck!" And in that moment, I didn't know that two of my rowers were right behind me, and they said, "You can't say that. You're a priest." And there's that expectation that is given to us in that sense of being clergy or being a priest, that is layered into all of this, that there's an expectation about how and who we're supposed to be. And beyond that, one of those things is we are not supposed to have, especially not supposed to have mental health issues, right? We're supposed to be well-adjusted, and that all things are solved because we spend our lives in a close relationship with God. And I will tell you that's an unfair expectation that people put on us, and not real, and not based in reality, because all clergy are humans too. So for me, my a challenge of suicidal ideation came in my first year of seminary. I had moved from the New York City area to Virginia, was attending seminary. My kids at the time were in grade school. They had left their school, moved to the new school. That it was a big challenge for them. My wife had just been finishing up her education degree and was beginning to teach, and so all of this kind of enormous changes in our lives. And for me, it was caught up in this question of, am I worthy to do this? Can I can I meet the objectives and expectations of everybody involved, including the bishop who was going to ordain me after seminary, and some of that, it was just fear that I layered into my life, and unnecessary fear, but real fear, in that the people were there to support me and weren't, it wasn't a measure of me trying to live up to their expectations. I was, but for me internally, that was my my fear, and so that grew and grew to a point and to a day, and around this time in the year 2000, in October 2000, where I was overwhelmed with this sense of just of stopping the pain and anxiety that had developed in me, and the only solution at that moment was to end my life. The only thing I could think about was to end my life, and so that brought me to that place.
Meredith, I know that you had a suicide attempt. Is that something that you found you could talk about at the time? Did it take you a while to tease it out? And what were the events that led up to it?
I did not talk about it for a really long time. And it goes to the expectations that I placed on myself from my family. Like, if they weren't proud of me if I got a B, they're not going to be really thrilled about me talking about killing myself. So I carried that through and continued the shame for a very long time. I wrote a post on my blog. That's kind of how I outed myself about the struggle. And it was on the heels of Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade. And those two very public suicides just floored me. One, because we watched Anthony Bourdain's show all the time.
Yeah.
And it just was a very public moment. And I thought, I can tell my side. I can tell why I'm here. And I can tell how I'm grateful to be here. And so that's when I first was really public about it. And that was about 2 years before my book. Mm-hmm. What led up to it, and I can connect the dots now, I couldn't at the time. I was an Olympic style weightlifter in high school, a pretty successful one. I quit that when I started college, and I never connected the kind of the grief of losing my athleticism, this thing I did every day for 2 to 3 hours. And I didn't pick up a new athletic hobby. Instead, I picked up drinking. I picked up smoking, and just not doing anything. And so for me, the connection between mental health and physical movement mm-hmm. is very big. And also food. It's very tied for me. So if I'm treating my body like a trash can and I'm eating poorly and I'm not exercising, my mental health suffers. It is a direct correlation for me. And I know that may not be the case for everyone. And it's certainly not just, that's solved. But the degree which my life has improved since starting movement again about 10 years ago, and waking up every day and knowing I'm going to move, that has been the thing that keeps me going. It really was important for me. So the things that led up to it was just darkness. It was like a lack of movement. It was a lot of sugar. It was a lot of alcohol. It was mixed with prescription drugs. And it was just the tipping point was I can't live this way anymore. And so I thought I'd check out, and it didn't work. My husband, then boyfriend, the man still married me. He was there and got me help, and I spent 3 days in a recovery unit, which was very interesting because they just let me out and no one followed up. Like, hey, we just want to check on you for 5 days, like nothing. They just let me out, and that was the end of it, and so I kind of just buried it. because no one checked on me. My parents and my family were not real thrilled about it, obviously. Mm-hmm. I won't go as far to say they're ashamed, but it wasn't like I was running down the street and being like, hey, your perfect daughter, I'm putting air quotes up. All appearances were that I had everything together. Mm-hmm. And so I just didn't talk about it for 15 years. And then I did. And the response I received speaking out about it was just like you would expect. It was great. It was supportive. It was thank you for sharing this, because like Bob says, everyone is struggling. Not everyone, but a large percentage of people struggle. And this idea that we don't struggle because we're a priest or we're a lawyer or we've got our act together is not true. And I think part of what made me really share it was because the thoughts came back again. They came back again, and I wasn't, by all intents and purposes, I had everything. I had the job. I had the 2.5 kids in the suburbs. I had my Louis Vuitton purse sitting in my SUV, and I dreamed of driving myself into a tree every day coming home from work. I mean, it could have been the practice of law. I did get out of that for a reason. But when I felt that come back, I thought, oh gosh, I have to really do something about it. And that's when I chose to, quit drinking. And that really made a huge difference. But yeah, it's real.
And I'll come back to that in a second. And Elizabeth, so you've been driven to do this work. I mean, this can't be the easiest career path for anybody to take on the issues and problems of a very difficult constituency. I imagine you have to get much more emotionally involved than lawyers who are representing other types of clients. Whoop, you're on mute.
We've been Zooming for 7 months now. I should know this. In any event, yes and no. No attorney should become too emotionally involved in a case. That's my belief. On the other hand, the minute you stop caring, in my opinion, is the moment you should leave. So there's a very, very delicate balance to strike. That being said, I'm not really driven to do this kind of work, but rather I'm inspired because there's a need. And there's a need for attorneys who not only are understanding, but also know about mental disabilities and know its influence on the client and their involvement and the resources he or she may need as they're navigating through the system. You mentioned earlier writing a chapter for the book that I'm editing. Another woman by the name of Francesca Flood and I are editing a book to be published by the American Bar Association on the phenomena of suicide within the legal system. And we're focusing not only on litigants who may attempt or follow through with suicide, but also we're going to discuss the topic of attorney wellness. And in terms of the research and the interviews we've conducted of attorneys who had clients attempt to suicide or follow through with it, to a person, every attorney feels so rotten when it happens. There's no other way to express it. And part of the problem is, if you will, no one ever warns us that this is going to happen if we're attorneys. And when it does, sometimes we've seen the handwriting on the wall, but we never think it'll go that far, or we're completely taken by surprise. And the reactions by other people in the system are well, they spread the gamut. For instance, there's this one author in our book who talks about how she went to the courtroom one morning for her client's hearing, and no one in the jail, no one in the prosecutor's office bothered to tell her or her client's family, who, by the way, was sitting in the courtroom, that the client had suicided. So she's standing in the well of the courtroom waiting for her client, who is in custody, to be brought up. And the client doesn't materialize. And then the prosecutor, with a smirk on his face, says that the case can be dismissed because the client has suicided. And you can imagine the reaction on the part of the defense attorney. And even more absurdly, you can imagine the reaction on the part of the client's family who's sitting in the courtroom. That's one example. On the other hand, some attorneys feel that after it happens, there's just no place to go. Like Meredith discussed earlier, we as attorneys tend to internalize a lot, and we're very sensitive to the fact that people judge us not only by how we act, but by the stiff upper lip that we tend to keep. So sometimes for months and years, attorneys keep this guilt, if you will, welled up inside them. And so thankfully, more and more, the legal profession is grappling with the concept of wellness and telling people that you need to address your issues, and there's no shame in it. And indeed, a number of states in their applications to sit for the bar have removed the question as to whether or not you have sought any mental health treatment. Meredith talked about how her parents distanced themselves and almost were in denial about her suicide attempt. And I think in large part that's generational. And more in recent years, we're realizing that there is no shame in going through trauma, in watching trauma, in being a survivor of vicarious trauma, that in order to be there for our clients, we have to be as healthy, not only in body, but also in mind as possible.
To hear you use the word suicided as like the past tense of a verb is very difficult for me to hear.
Okay.
I have this I'm having this visceral reaction because it's easier for me to think of it, I don't know, as a noun or a participle maybe, I don't really know, but something like to commit suicide. Commit is the verb, right? But it has such power in the way that you described it, and I'm feeling I'm going back not just to the way I felt, but how my family felt when they found out, and because the way that my children found out was that they came and visited me at a drug rehab mental hospital, Silver Hill, here in Connecticut. And we were sitting on the front steps, and I remember my daughter, who was my older daughter was 18, and my younger daughter was 14, and they were sitting on the front steps and crying and like just holding me. And I remember saying, "Dad, I don't know if I know you." And we were extraordinarily close, but I was living a double life for so long. I would love to talk about what that is to kind of be in hiding, to have to hide the truth about who we are, or the pain we're going through, or the things that we're doing to cope, or to not let people know. And I don't think I ever had a stiff upper lip. I think people knew I was crazy, but I don't think they knew that I was in pain, or if they did, they never talked to me about it. So anybody want to share that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. First, I want to, what Elizabeth mentioned about, I didn't know that they took the requirement about the mental health status off of the bar admissions. That's really amazing. Because I remember
it's a growing trend.
Good. That's so wonderful. Because I was 4 years post suicide attempt when I applied for the bar in Georgia, and there was a huge section, on explain this. And I remember the shame of thinking, oh my gosh, I just went through law school. I did everything that was expected of me, and I have to relive this and hope that they don't think I'm after all this, hope that they don't think I'm a threat to, my clients. And so I just wanted to comment on that. But as far as the shame and the hiding, that was so very real to me. And it's only stopped being real recently. I think when you grow up with certain expectations of yourself, or they're placed on you and you continue them, when you have dark thoughts and you have dark feelings, when you become an addict, whatever it is, like, you can't show anyone that. There's just this feeling like I can't show them. They're going to be so disappointed in me, or people won't understand. I won't be heard. I'll be stigmatized. I won't pass the bar exam. I mean, there's so many external forces that tell us, maybe you don't want to share that. And so I love where we are right now as a society, or, no, I don't love where we are, but I love parts that we're talking about this more, that there's a community that's discussing it, because I think that internal shame just feeds more. It feeds more addiction. It made me drink more. I know, just thinking, why am I such a piece of shit? Let me just go drown out that feeling with more alcohol, and on it went, until I became conscious enough to say, okay, I got to put a stop to this. But that is a gift, to suddenly wake up and have the opportunity to say, okay, I think I'm at rock bottom, but not rock bottom, without actually falling there and landing there. I mean, that's where I was 5 years ago, and that's a great gift, and not everyone gets it. So the ability to speak that darkness and talk about it is the gift now, that people can reach out to you, Jeff, to you, Bob, and say how they're feeling, and know that they're going to be met with love, because I wasn't so sure of that back in 2000.
On the other hand, there are some people who can't disclose, and who know that their vulnerabilities will not be met with love. And those are people who are incarcerated. And to say the least, jails and prisons are not therapeutic environments. And people who are suspected of being suicidal, or who attempt suicide, are treated in the worst and most perverse ways. Everything from being thrown into solitary confinement to being reprimanded and punished for their suicide attempt. And on the other hand, many attorneys who suspect that their clients are, if you will, on the edge, are conflicted about what to do. Because if, for instance, a client is on pretrial release, and it's divulged to the court that the client is profoundly depressed, the court may very well rescind the bond, and the client may have to go into custody. And so we for 1,000 different reasons, we need to rethink our system of incarceration in this country. And one of the aspects of that is we need to rethink how we handle people who are on the verge of suicide.
Yeah, I'm glad that you turned it at least a little bit into criminal justice system. Our audience is basically people involved in the justice system somewhat, either as a defendant or a family member or an attorney or a judge, but also people who have substance abuse and mental health issues. And maybe that's just because that's what informed my decision making in starting the ministry. It's been easier, as I think Meredith said, it's been easier to have a pulpit now to be able to speak from. There's people listening, and Bob, certainly I want to go there with you. But all of us are talking about this from our own social locations, from the way that we come to it. An example is, I've been on Meredith's podcast, but I've also been on her support group. And so she has 40 or 50 people who come on the support group. I may be underestimating Meredith. There were 40 or 50 people on that day. And they need someone who's going to talk to them truthfully, and they need to be able to express themselves. And so what I found when I went to Meredith's group, for example, is that the people who are there, because they obviously have been there often, they know one another, they know Meredith, it's refreshingly candid. And they're talking about stuff that I never talked about while I was going through the throes of it. So my question is, Bob, what's the message that you give to, say, a church who may or may not understand the universality of the message that you're going to give? Can you just walk into a church and say, oh, by the way, I'm going to preach today on mental illness, and by the way, I'm someone who's mentally ill? I mean, how do you do that?
Right. I mean, there is that sense of trust of your audience. I mean, even within the congregation, that you're going to be received a certain way and received positively. But there's always a risk that that people aren't going to take it well. Even today, that we've come so far in being willing to discuss suicide and all of its effects, but I've gone into with fear and trepidation into the pulpit when I'm going to talk about mental health, or when I talk about my own suicidal ideation or my struggles with depression and anxiety over the years. And it is something that I kind of have to walk of faith to say this is going to be received well, and not worry whether it's going to touch everybody, because there's, not everybody struggles with mental illness, and not everybody has a suicide attempt or a suicidal ideation in their lives, but most everybody knows somebody who has had that experience, and so it's a real piece to, I think, all of our lives, and so to address it brings it out, and even if it's not as well received, it's that risk of how it's going to be received is less important. That the folks trust me, that I'm going to give them a message of hope, that that it's, particularly in speaking specifically about suicide, that it's an illness, that our brain is not well. And because of that, our brain chemistry changes in and around a suicide attempt or ideation, and that's, you can't. There shouldn't be shame around a chemical reaction in your brain. I mean, it's no different than in the sense of breaking a bone or having a heart-related issue. It's something that happens, and it's sure. an environmental reaction that's caught up in thinking because it's in our, because it's a brain, issue, but our thinking isn't normal. Think about, you get your foot stepped on. All you're thinking about is the pain about your foot being stepped on and trying to stop that pain, right? And that's what's the same place as we get into with suicide. That's what the medical research has found is, you have substantial changes in your brain chemistry, which substantially change how you think and what your options are and what you consider doing. And the impact of that, I think, for me, for a long time, and I never talked about, there were 2 or 3 people who knew about my suicide ideation, and that hour of my life, or less than that. But that it took me 10 years to kind of feel okay about just not making that decision. There were days where I was like, wow, this is real. I'm living, but I'm not thriving. And I wanted to be in a better place to thrive. And it took a long time for me to get there, and a lot of work on myself and with therapy and spending time with people.
I've read a lot of books on recovery and mental illness and on criminal justice issues, and including mine that's in the works. And it's so hard to characterize. Is it a memoir? Is it a how-to book?
Right.
Is it but Bob, your book is really a workbook. I mean, you actually have workbook pages in it.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, when you give the section, I don't know, probably like 27 chapters or something like that. You give a section, and then there's a workbook section. Do you ever get the feedback from the people who are filling in the workbook to actually find out what they're writing about themselves?
So I haven't had anybody say, "Gee, let me show you what I'm writing about," but I have had people kind of thank me in that they said, "No, I've been able to work through your," as I would say, it's a spiritual journal, right? So that it's tied into a biblical theme, a verse, and then a reflection really from my own experiences, and then that prompting question of, variety of prompts that someone can write on. And in doing that, I've had people reflect back to me to saying, "Hey, this has been really helpful for me to walk through it." One of the things I do, and title of my book, Courage to Thrive, is to tell people to slow down with the book, because it is short reflections. People can move through it quickly, but that's not the point. The point is to allow it to percolate and to reflect in thinking and writing about where they are in their life. Part of the reason is in doing that, we can begin to change our thinking. When we put pen to paper about and be able to find these positive aspects of things and begin to reshape our neural patterns and not just be caught up with the negative aspects of what happened, but also to look forward to a positive place where, and to throw my subtitles, where we can find joy and hope in things. And so by that action of writing, it's really critical.
So Meredith, the way that you and I became connected was that you saw me on the Rich Roll podcast last year. I'm proud to say I'm probably the fattest person who's ever been on the Rich Roll podcast.
Well, that's because he hasn't had me yet. So Rich Roll is an ultra marathoner and
a vegan.
And a vegan, but he also had a similar situation, an ex-lawyer who crashed and burned, and he has his story. So we have a lot in common. And I've been trying to hook Meredith and Rich up together because I really want her to be on his podcast. So if anyone in Rich's camp is watching this, I'm pitching Meredith. But what happened was, I read Meredith's book. I can't remember if you sent me a copy first or not. I can't remember what the order was. But I started sending it into our folks who were in prison. And I really didn't know if I was sending it to them because I was trying to help Meredith, or I was sending it to them because I was trying to help them. You know, there's always that kind of dual piece. And I didn't really know what they were going to think because I was sending it to men. I didn't know if it was a woman's book. I couldn't kind of figure that out. And I'm glad you brought up prison, Elizabeth, because I've sent it now to 7 or 8 people inside prison, and Meredith has gotten responses. Some of them on Amazon, and some of them I've sent her. And I think it's amazing that when people are sitting in the most difficult places of their lives, that somehow our work or our message is reaching out to them. You don't even know where it's reaching. It's just finding its own path. So Meredith, now you have a book out there, you have a podcast, you're reaching a lot of people, and it's a message of hope. It's a message of life and life. It's life affirming, but you do it from being honest about your brokenness. And so, how does that work? I mean, do you find that people are they connect to the work? Do they connect to you? I mean, how does that work?
I think they connect to the honesty and to the story and to the fact that I don't think I'm better than anyone. Like I was one decision away from being right there in prison too. We're all one decision away from being on the other side. And it's just by the grace of God, I didn't end up there, honestly, you know? And so I always try and share that as well. Like, look, you may be here. I've been here. They're very similar. They're just separated by a choice or two. And that humans as a species, we all have darkness. And so I like to really bring that to the light and challenge people to see their darkness. Because when you look it in the eye, it's like classic Brene Brown. Shame cannot grow in the light. It grows in the dark. It grows in secrets and lies. And so the sooner we can just bring that out and talk openly. I mean, I was so open in my book about my struggles. And I also encourage people to look backward only for the purpose of learning where it came from. Because I think so much when we grow up, become adults, we think, where did this come from? Why am I broken? This sucks. You know, I can't be fixed. And if you just kind of look in the rearview mirror at your experiences, your trauma, where you came from, where you got named and numbered and told you were worthless, and you embodied it from a young age, like that becomes part of your core belief system. And then the work you have, like Bob said, it's a workbook. I mean, it is writing and figuring out, how do I dismantle this negative belief I've been carrying? And I think someone in prison can get my book and say, oh my gosh, you know, I have these beliefs, and they can do that work. And they can, I mean, every human can do that work to dismantle these core beliefs that we've gathered throughout the years. And that's kind of the work that I do, is say, hey, you know, you're going to have these bad thoughts, you're going to mess up, but how do you start to change that? And that's really the process I talk about.
Well, you all have books, and I got on board with your book, Meredith, just before COVID. So you were actually on your book tour already. And I imagine what happened was that the book tour got canceled, right? That was it.
It did. I missed my Union Square Barnes and Noble date. Such a bummer.
Oh yeah, I remember that. So how do you get the message out now if you can't be on the book tour? All the rules are suspended. The plans have changed. What are you doing?
Well, I'm relying on you, Jeff. You single-handedly publicizing my book. I think it's so interesting. I was having this conversation with my husband. I had this dream that it would be a New York Times bestseller, and then I'd be off to the races, right? Like Oprah, Brene, we're all hanging out. I still dream that. I still believe it, by the way. But it's that idea that it doesn't really matter how many, it doesn't really matter the number. It matters the quality of the people you impact. And so almost everyone that gets my book, they either love it or hate it, because it's the kind of book where you're ready to deal or you're not ready to deal. And like, you will not like this book if you want sugar-coated Rachel Hollis stuff. Like, you're not going to like it. It's not that book. But the people that do like it are the ones that are ready to change. And then they tell their friends, and then I've stopped publicizing it. There's nothing I can do. It's out of my hands. It's been out almost a year. Everyone knows in the book world, if you didn't make it in the first 2 weeks, you're host. So whatever. But it's about how can I impact one-on-one? And so that's where I focus now. How can I work with my clients and people I meet and try and connect? Because at the core level, I would rather be doing that than reaching 1 million people on a surface level.
Nice. And Elizabeth, you're kind of in the same place, but I've spoken to Francesca, and your co-editor, and she's actually joined us on our White Collar support group on Monday nights.
Yes, she had a wonderful time.
Yeah, because she's justice impacted. You like that term, justice impacted? And
It's really accurate.
But the planning that goes into editing a book about suicide or suicide attempts, and then having to make the connections and the relationships with people who are going to make submissions, and somehow you have to knit it together into something that's cohesive, something that I can't even imagine what that process is about. So you want to talk to us a little bit about what goes into that?
No.
This is not the first time you've done it either.
No, this is my third time at the rodeo.
Yeah.
This is the third book that I've edited and the third book that the ABA is publishing. That being said, because of the fact that ABA is publishing it, because the first two books representing people with mental disabilities and a practical guide for criminal defense lawyers, and representing people with autism spectrum disorders, a practical guide for criminal defense lawyers, were pitched at criminal defense lawyers. And this third book is intended for all players within the legal system. I don't have any aspirations to do that book signing at Barnes & Noble Union Square. That being said, I've made it a mission to train other criminal defense lawyers in how to, as effectively as possible, represent this particular population. In terms of binding this book on suicide into a unified whole, I think it's going to be relatively easy, because Francesca and I have spent a good deal of time coming up with a table of contents that encompasses not only a diversity of topics, but a diversity of voices. And we're both writing the introduction, and we're both writing introductions to individual chapters. So although the individual chapters will be done by different authors, there will be a unified voice.
The chapter I'm submitting is the chapter that starts out with, in the minutes leading up to my suicide attempt. Then it goes into the backstory, and then it ends with me in the same chair where the chapter started, where I take the vial of pills. But the story in between, the story I'm telling that's leading up to it, is really about grandiosity and kind of an indifference for my health and the health of my family and the health of the people around me. I was just so sick or self-involved there's the behavioral side, and then, as Bob said, the chemical side, and it all kind of came together in a picture of someone I don't think I would like very much right now. But certainly who, if they came to me, I would want to help them. I would have tools to be able to help them. But I recognize things in myself that are painful. They're I can't believe that was me. I guess that's really what it is. I can't believe that was me. We're closing on our time. I want to make sure we just go around and offer you all a chance to give a takeaway or two. What's the message that you'd like people to leave this with? And then give us some information about how people can contact you and where they can find your book. Definitely hold up a copy if you want. If not, I'll hold up copies of your books. But let's make sure people understand exactly what the takeaways are. Bob, why don't we start with you?
I would say probably hang a lot on the idea of self-forgiveness. I think spiritual growth starts with that understanding that that we have to forgive ourselves before we can forgive others. We have to forgive ourselves before we can really love others. I talk about in my book, Courage to Thrive, finding joy and hope in the midst of mental health struggles. I talk about that in terms of the commandment that Jesus gave to that we should love God and to love our neighbors as ourselves. Well, there have been days in my life when I've gotten up and I have, woken up in the morning and kind of, look at myself in the mirror and said, there's not a whole lot of self-love there, right? How am I going to love somebody else when I, frankly, Jesus, don't love myself? And I think that there's that one straight takeaway that we can all have for me in my book and my work is to come to that place of self-forgiveness. And once we can see ourselves as people that need forgiveness and need our own forgiveness, we can begin to really come to that place where, as I talk about, to develop that courage to thrive and to be able to develop that place where we can step out and not just kind of make our way through life, but to find life to be a beautiful, lovely, and joyful place filled with hope. And so that's the takeaway that I have. My website, robertdflanagan.com, you can find all of my information there, and my book is available on Amazon and all the other usual online sorts.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bob. Meredith.
Yes. So self-forgiveness, I would say self-awareness is sort of where I kind of come to. And I don't know if you need to forgive yourself first or become aware first, because sometimes if we become aware first, you may think there's no way I could forgive myself. So it's kind of chicken or the egg argument. But for me, learning the truth about ourselves, our situation, that is hard. Pulling our head out of the sand and looking in the mirror, looking at our lives, seeing the mess. It's like when you're in a tremendous amount of debt and you put it all in a spreadsheet and then you think, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to get out of this? But that's exactly how you do it. You have to see what you're dealing with before you can do anything. And so I like to talk about, and I guess I'll pull my book out here, The Year of Nonsense. I talk about self-awareness and learning where my, who I am, even that dark side and what I'm struggling with, because unless you see the truth, there's nowhere for you to go. You don't know where you're going. You have no true north. And so that would be my takeaway. And you can follow me everywhere at Swim Bike Mom. And my book is available at the bookstores and Amazon. And yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Meredith. Elizabeth.
Thank you. I fear not only for our country, but I fear for our world because of this pandemic. And I'm not just talking about the physical health ramifications. I'm not just talking about the economic devastation. I'm talking about the anxiety and the depression and the trauma that is impacting billions of people throughout this world, not only on a small level, but on a great level. And I fear that we as a society are going to be dealing with the impact of the pandemic for probably decades after its conclusion. And during that time, the criminal justice system, I fear, is also going to be dealing with people who are suffering from anxiety, depression, and trauma caused by the pandemic. And we know that when people are in the throes of those conditions, they make bad decisions. They take actions that they otherwise would not have. And unfortunately, for too long, we have used our criminal justice system as a place to deal with what is a public health issue. So in light of that, I hope that criminal defense lawyers and prosecutors and judges and all the stakeholders in the system will think of sensible, responsible ways to mitigate that damage and, when appropriate, to divert those people out of the criminal justice system and give them the help that they so profoundly need.
And Elizabeth, how would people get in touch with you?
My email is zealousadvocacy@aol.com, and my Twitter handle is @mentalhealthesq, and I have a website, www.elizabethkelleylaw.com. That's Elizabeth with a Z, and Kelley is how you spell my last name. And you don't have to be a lawyer to buy and read and hopefully benefit from my 2 books. You can go on the ABA publishing website, which is shockaba.org.
Thank you. We'll have links and details and photos of the covers of all of your books on our website. And since Meredith taught me how to do show notes, it'll all be there. And for anyone who's listening who's having a crisis or knows someone in crisis right now, if it's a deep enough crisis, obviously dial 911. Or reach out to someone who's very close to you. But you can also reach out to any of us, because I know that that we are all open and willing to take calls or emails or tweets or whatever, and we'll respond. But there's a lot of help out there. A lot of people who are doing a lot of good, and brothers and sisters, you are not alone. We've been through it, and no one has to go through it alone. So thank you all for being with me today, and I hope that this spurs a lot of conversation and a lot of thoughts, and maybe some networking between you. And thank you all, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for joining us on White Collar Week, sponsored by Progressive Prison Ministries. You can learn more about us on our website, prisonist.org. That's prisonist, like feminist. And please remember to rate, review, and share this podcast so that families suffering in silence can find us if they need us. See you next time.